Blake Monroe stood frozen in the vast terminal of Nashville International Airport, gripping the strap of her small leather purse so tightly that her knuckles had turned white, as though the pressure could somehow shield her from the sharp, sudden wave of betrayal that had just swept over her entire world. The terminal was alive with movement, the mechanical clatter of rolling suitcases, the intermittent chime of flight announcements over the intercom, parents coaxing tired children along long corridors, teenagers laughing loudly as they navigated their way through the throngs of travelers. But all of it blurred into a dull, indistinct hum in Blake's mind, fading into an almost dreamlike background against the overwhelming shock of what had her. Only moments before she had felt a fragile, tentative hope. This trip, they had said, would be a family getaway, a chance to lift her from the heavy, crushing fog of grief that had consumed her ever since her beloved husband Jake had passed away 2 months ago. 2 months of hollow mornings, endless nights filled with aching loneliness, and an emptiness that seemed to stretch endlessly into the future. She had allowed herself to believe in the promise of this trip, trusting that Mark, her son, and Tanya, her daughter-in-law, genuinely cared for her well-being, that perhaps she was still a valued part of their lives. But the moment it shattered all of that, Tanya had walked past the security checkpoint with that perfectly poised, rehearsed smile, her designer luggage gliding smoothly behind her as though nothing in the world could touch her. Mark, sunglasses masking the cold detachment in his eyes, had not spared even a glance for his mother, as if acknowledging her presence would require an emotional engagement he was unwilling or incapable to give. Blake's stomach dropped, a sickening twist of disbelief and horror tightening around her chest. She had been abandoned. Completely. Abandoned, not because of miscommunication or logistical confusion, but intentionally, deliberately, without a shred of consideration for her feelings or her fragile emotional state. She had been left with nothing, no luggage and no one to guide her, no ticket back, and only the small remnants of a life she had trusted would be respected. All she had were her faded sweater, the flimsy folder of travel documents she had packed with careful attention, and a small envelope tucked into the pocket of her purse containing the contact information of a lawyer, a trusted friend of Jake's, who had once promised he would help her if she ever found herself in need of legal guidance or protection. Tanya's words had struck her with the subtle cruelty of someone who had rehearsed the exact phrasing for maximum emotional distance. "You'll figure it out. You've got your phone, right? Sell it if you need bus money. That should cover a Greyhound or something." They had spoken them with such calm, deliberate detachment, as though Blake's shock and pain were merely minor inconveniences in the grand scheme of their lives. The realization hit her with devastating clarity. Her own son, the boy she had raised, nurtured, and supported for over 2 decades, and his wife, someone she had welcomed and tried to love, had collaborated to discard her, leaving her alone in a massive, impersonal airport terminal with nothing to rely on but her wits, the tiny lawyer card in her pocket, and her own fading sense of self-worth. Her thoughts spun frantically as memories of a lifetime flashed before her. 42 years of marriage, a life shared with Jake filled with love, small triumphs, quiet domestic rituals, and the unspoken understanding that comes from decades of companionship. Now all of that felt surreal, as though it had existed only in a parallel universe that had been cruelly stripped away. She felt the familiar sting of abandonment, a pain she had first known as a child when her father had left for what was supposed to be a short trip and had never returned. The betrayal now felt magnified 1,000 times over. This time, it was not just a parent, but the very children she had raised and loved, the ones who should have been her protectors in the world, who had cast her aside. Her hands shook violently as she pressed the flimsy folder against her chest, trying to hold onto some fragile sense of dignity. Around her, life continued with stark indifference, a mother tugging a child along, a businessman checking his boarding pass, a group of college students laughing as their suitcases clattered behind them. Completely unaware that Blake's world had just collapsed, she wanted to scream, to throw herself into the crowd and demand justice, to make Mark and Tanya feel even a fraction of the emotional devastation they had inflicted. But she did not. She simply sat on a cold metal bench, letting her breath come in shallow, ragged waves as she contemplated the bitter reality. She was alone, unprepared, and yet, paradoxically, this loneliness was also a spark, the first flicker of an ember that might ignite into the determination. For the first time since Jake's passing, Blake realized that while grief had immobilized her, the betrayal had awakened a hidden strength. She reached into her purse, fingers trembling, and clutched the lawyer's card. It was more than a piece of paper. It was a lifeline, a symbol that she still had options, that she still had control over the life she feared she had lost forever. And as she sat there, sunlight cutting through the large glass windows and casting long, harsh lines across the terminal floor, Blake Monroe made a silent, resolute vow. She would rise. She would reclaim her life, her dignity, her independence, and her voice. She would navigate the labyrinth of betrayal and isolation, not with bitterness alone, but with intention, strategy, and strength. Abandonment might have wounded her, but it would never, ever break her. Blake sat on the cold metal bench, her fingers still wrapped tightly around the small envelope containing the lawyer's card, feeling the edges dig into her palm as if to remind her that she still had a connection to the world, a lifeline she could grasp even when everything else had been stripped away. Around her, the terminal pulsed with life, yet she felt detached from it as though she were observing from behind an invisible wall. The airport staff moved efficiently, guiding passengers, making announcements, their voices fading into the background of her tumultuous thoughts. Blake's mind raced as she considered her options, trying to piece together a plan that could transform her current helplessness into control. She knew that Mark and Tanya had underestimated her, assuming that her grief had made her fragile and dependent, incapable of asserting herself. But they were gravely mistaken. She was hurt, yes, devastated, yes, but she was not powerless. Not anymore. Taking a deep breath, Blake pulled out her phone and dialed the number on the lawyer's card, each ring stretching her tension like a taut string. When the voice on the other end answered, calm and measured, she felt a flicker of relief, a small confirmation that she was not entirely alone. "Hello, Mr. Kalisle. This is Blake Monroe. I need your help," she said, her voice trembling but firm, carrying the weight of suppressed frustration and a newfound resolve. As they spoke, she recounted every detail, the one-way ticket, the abandonment at the airport, Tanya's cold suggestion to sell her phone for bus fare, the blatant disregard for her emotional state. Mr. Carlyle listened attentively, taking notes, asking pointed questions that confirmed he understood the gravity of the situation, and, more importantly, the legal avenues available to her. Blake felt the first stirrings of empowerment begin to take root, a feeling she hadn't experienced in months. While the lawyer outlined the steps she could take to protect her assets and assert her rights, Blake's mind wandered back to the countless moments she had devoted to her family, the years she had spent nurturing and supporting Mark, raising him with love and care, guiding him through the complexities of life, all in the hope that he would grow into a compassionate, responsible adult. And now, here he was, abandoning her in the midst of her vulnerability, colluding with Tanya to disregard her dignity and independence. The sense of betrayal cut deeper than the grief she had felt over Jake's death. But alongside that pain, a fierce determination began to simmer, a resolve that she would not allow their selfishness to dictate the course of her life. Blake realized that the grief that had once immobilized her could now be channeled into action, and that action could become her redemption. Mr. Carlyle suggested a series of steps: securing temporary accommodations, drafting legal notices to protect her assets, and exploring avenues to formally exclude Mark and Tanya from any claim to her estate. He assured her that with careful planning, she could safeguard not only her financial independence but also her emotional autonomy, ensuring that the people who had sought to exploit her vulnerability would be unable to benefit from it. Blake felt a wave of relief wash over her, but it was tempered by the reality of the effort required. She would have to face her fears, navigate the challenges alone, and maintain a steadfast commitment to herself in the face of potential backlash from her own family. But for the first time since Jake's death, she felt a spark of hope. She ended the call, her fingers brushing the small card once more before tucking it safely into her purse. Then, with deliberate steps, Blake rose from the bench, her movements steady and purposeful. The terminal no longer felt intimidating, but instead like a stage upon which she could begin to reclaim her life. She sought out a quiet corner, contacted a nearby hotel for a temporary room, and arranged for her luggage, whatever she could gather, to be sent later. Each small action, mundane as it might have seemed to an outsider, became a symbolic assertion of her independence and resilience. She was no longer waiting to be rescued. She was rescuing herself. As she sat in her temporary room that evening, Blake reflected on the profound lessons embedded in the day's events. Family, she realized, could fail in devastating ways, and trust, once broken, required immense courage to rebuild, if it could be rebuilt at all. Yet, within the painful recognition of betrayal lay the seeds of empowerment, a chance to define her own life, to establish boundaries that would protect her from exploitation, to assert her dignity in ways she had never fully realized she could. She began drafting her first letters and documents, detailing her intentions regarding her estate, carefully excluding those who had failed her, and allocating her assets to causes and organizations that aligned with her values. Programs supporting elderly individuals, shelters, and advocacy groups dedicated to protecting the vulnerable. Each word she wrote felt like a small victory, a step toward reclaiming control. By the time night fell over Nashville, Blake felt a calm determination settle over her, a quiet, unshakable strength. She knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. She would face resistance from Mark and Tanya, potential legal hurdles, and the gnawing ache of confronting her grief without the immediate comfort of her late husband's presence. But she also knew that she had discovered something invaluable, the capacity to rise from despair, to channel pain into strategy, and to build a life guided not by the selfishness of others, but by her own vision of dignity and respect. Blake Monroe was no longer a passive participant in her own story. She was its author, and the first chapter of her new life had just begun. The next morning, Blake awoke before dawn, the soft golden light of the rising sun spilling into her temporary hotel room and casting long shadows across the floor. The events of the previous day, the betrayal, the cold dismissal, Tanya's rehearsed smile, Mark's indifferent gaze played over and over in her mind like a looping film reel, each replay intensifying her anger and clarifying her determination. She made herself a cup of tea, her hands steady despite the lingering adrenaline, and began organizing her strategy. Today, she would take her first tangible steps, small but precise, to reclaim what had been taken from her, not just her dignity, but her autonomy and her right to be treated with respect by those she had loved unconditionally. Blake began by drafting a careful message to Mark. Her words chosen with surgical precision. She did not want to scream or beg. She wanted clarity, accountability, and acknowledgement. Mark, I expected better. I traced it, you and Tanya. You left me stranded without a plan or support. This is unacceptable. I am taking steps to protect myself and my assets. I hope you will reflect on your actions. Sending the message was a mix of relief and trepidation. The act itself, addressing the betrayal directly, was empowering, yet the uncertainty of how Mark would react nodded her. Would he feel guilt? Defensiveness? Or would he continue in his cold indifference? While waiting for any response, Blake turned her attention to tangible preparations. She reviewed her finances, contacting her bank to ensure that her accounts were secure and that no unauthorized access could occur. She arranged for legal documents to be notarized and stored safely, including power of attorney papers and estate revisions. Every step was deliberate, calculated, and empowering. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of control over her life, a quiet yet powerful assurance that she could navigate any obstacles placed in her path. Each small action became a brick in the foundation of a new life, one in which Blake Monroe would not be manipulated, neglected, or dismissed. By mid-morning, she received a brief response from Mark, a single line, cold and measured, attempting to justify their actions. He wrote, "Mom, we thought this would be easier for everyone. You're overreacting. Tanya and I have been under pressure too." Blake reads the message slowly, letting the words sink in. His tone, attempting to minimize the gravity of their betrayal, only strengthened her resolve. She realized then that confrontation alone was insufficient. Action was essential. She would not allow vague excuses to excuse outright disregard and selfishness. Feeling a surge of determination, Blake began compiling a timeline of events, meticulously noting every detail of her interactions with Mark and Tanya over the past weeks, the moments leading up to the airport abandonment, and the subtle manipulations she had endured. Each note reinforced the reality of their betrayal, yet each also fueled her resolve. Sue understood that evidence, precision, and clarity would be her tools in reclaiming justice, not anger alone, but a strategic, deliberate campaign to ensure that the consequences of their actions were real and undeniable. By early afternoon, Blake contacted Mr. Carlyle again, sharing her compiled timeline and seeking guidance on how to proceed with the legal revisions to her estate and the safeguarding of her personal assets. He praised her thoroughness and highlighted additional steps she could take, including securing independent financial advisors and documenting all communications with Mark and Tanya. Each recommendation added to her growing sense of empowerment. Every action reinforced the realization that she was no longer a passive victim, but an active agent in the creation of her own future. Despite the heavy weight of betrayal, Blake took a moment for herself, walking through the nearby streets, letting the crisp air clear her mind. The city around her moved with indifferent energy, shoppers, commuters, tourists, all engaged in lives that seemed full and complete. Blake's presence among them felt both isolating and liberating. Isolating because she had been cut off from her family and the support system she had relied on, liberating because she was fully responsible for the next steps in her life, and the decisions she made now would define her on her own terms, free from the manipulations of those who had wronged her. By evening, Blake was prepared for the first direct action in her reclamation of agency. She arranged for formal notices to be sent to Mark and Tanya, carefully outlining the legal measures she had implemented to protect her assets and estate. She did not write with venom. She wrote with clarity, precision, and an unshakable calm that contrasted sharply with the chaos they had imposed on her life. Each sentence carried the weight of authority and the undeniable fact that she had reclaimed her power. As she sealed the envelopes, Blake felt a quiet satisfaction, a recognition that while the road ahead would be complex and fraught with challenges, the first step had been taken. She had asserted herself, established boundaries, and demonstrated unequivocally that betrayal would not go unchallenged. Finally, as night fell over the city, Blake reflected on the day's progress. The sun had set, leaving a pale glow over the horizon, symbolizing the twilight of her former helplessness and the dawn of a new chapter in her life. The terminal's earlier chaos, the betrayal at the airport, the coldness of her son and daughter-in-law, all of it now fueled a powerful internal transformation. Blake Monroe had learned a critical truth: strength was born in adversity, and dignity could be reclaimed with deliberate action, clarity, and persistence. Tonight she would rest, but tomorrow the next stage of her journey would begin, guided not by grief or fear, but by empowerment, strategy, and the unwavering resolve to take back her life. The following morning, Blake awoke with a mixture of anticipation and quiet determination. She had spent the night reviewing the documents she had prepared, ensuring that every word, every clause, every detail reflected the seriousness and precision necessary to protect herself from any further attempts at manipulation. The formal notices to Mark and Tanya had already been sent via certified mail, and she knew they would receive them today. A subtle tension settled in her chest, a mix of satisfaction and apprehension. She wondered how they would respond, if they would deny responsibility, deflect blame, or finally recognize the depth of their betrayal. Either way, Blake understood that this was a crucial moment, not just for legal reasons, but for the emotional closure she desperately needed. At mid-morning, Blake received a text from Tanya, short and guarded. "We received your notices. Let's discuss this calmly later." Blake's heart raced, not with fear, but with the keen awareness that she was now in a position of strength. She carefully formulated her response, choosing neutrality and firmness over anger. "We will discuss only once clarity and mutual respect are maintained. I expect honesty, not excuses." Every word was deliberate. She refused to allow them to manipulate the conversation with guilt, flattery, or dismissive behavior. As the afternoon approached, Blake prepared for the inevitable meeting. She dressed with intention, choosing attire that reflected both confidence and composure, subtle, understated, yet powerful. The clothing itself became a symbolic armor, reinforcing her internal resolve. When she arrived at the small, neutral meeting room arranged by Mr. Carlyle, she found Mark and Tanya waiting, their expressions carefully constructed to mask any acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Tanya's smile was tight, her eyes darting as if searching for weaknesses, while Mark's posture attempted an air of casual indifference, though Blake detected a flicker of unease. The initial moments were tense, filled with polite but strained greetings. Blake took a seat, placing the legal documents in front of her in a precise, organized stack. She allowed the silence to settle, letting the weight of her presence and preparation communicate her resolve. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, calm, yet carried the underlying force of authority. "I have taken these steps not out of malice, but necessity. I will not allow past patterns of disregard to continue. This is about protecting what is rightfully mine and ensuring that mutual respect is upheld." Mark shifted in his seat, his casual demeanor faltering slightly. "Mom, we didn't mean for things to get so complicated. Tanya and I just—" Blake held up her hand, stopping him mid-sentence. She didn't need excuses. She needed acknowledgement. "No, I am not here to debate intent or motive. I am here to ensure action, accountability, and clarity. Excuses cannot undo what has already occurred, but responsible behavior moving forward can prevent further damage." The room fell into silence again, each of them aware that the usual patterns of manipulation and dismissal had no place here. Tanya's voice trembled slightly, betraying the composed mask she had attempted to wear. We thought you'd understand. You always taught us to be careful, to plan ahead." Blake's gaze hardened, not with anger, but with unwavering clarity. "Careful? Planning ahead?" "Tanya, planning ahead requires foresight, respect, and honesty, none of which were demonstrated yesterday or in the weeks leading up to it. I am done being left to navigate consequences that are not mine to bear alone." The conversation shifted slowly, Blake guiding it with precision. She outlined the legal measures she had enacted, the protections for her assets, and the clear boundaries she expected to be respected. Mark and Tanya listened, their attempts at casual dismissal faltering in the face of undeniable preparation and evidence. The air was thick with tension, yet Blake remained composed, her internal strength radiating through every word and gesture. She noticed subtle signs of realization in their expressions, a recognition that her empowerment was not temporary, nor could it be undermined by manipulation or emotional games. After nearly 2 hours, the meeting drew to a close. Blake had articulated every expectation, clarified every legal and personal boundary, and maintained control of the narrative. She did not gloat. She simply asserted her rights, her dignity, and her autonomy. As she stood, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment, not from the confrontation itself, but from the clarity and control she had maintained throughout. Mark Antonia's expressions were a mixture of unease, grudging acknowledgement, and silent calculation, each processing the consequences of their actions and the undeniable strength of the woman they had underestimated. Walking out of the meeting room, Blake felt a sense of liberation wash over her. The sun had shifted in the sky, casting long shadows over the city streets, symbolic of the past stretching behind her. She had faced her family, confronted betrayal head-on, and emerged not broken but fortified. The events of the day underscored a critical truth. Empowerment was not about revenge or punishment. It was about reclaiming control, asserting boundaries, and demonstrating resilience. Blake Monroe had transformed from a passive participant in her life to its deliberate architect, and this encounter was a pivotal chapter in that ongoing story. By the time she returned to a temporary room that evening, Blake reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The betrayal, the abandonment, the cold indifference, all had been catalysts for profound personal growth. She realized that strength, clarity, and dignity were not merely reactive states, but cultivated through deliberate action, strategic thought, and unwavering self-respect. With the first confrontation behind her, she now stood ready to face whatever challenges remained, confident in the knowledge that she could navigate them with the same precision, courage, and integrity she had demonstrated today. After the confrontation, Blake returned to her hotel room feeling a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The physical act of facing Mark and Tanya, of speaking her truth with clarity and precision, had drained her energy, yet the sense of empowerment she now carried was intoxicating. She sank into the armchair by the window, letting the city lights blur into a kaleidoscope of colors as she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. For months, she had allowed herself to be controlled, manipulated, and dismissed, rationalizing their behavior out of love and familial duty. Now she realized true love for oneself demanded accountability, boundaries, and unwavering self-respect. Blake began journaling her thoughts, writing not just to process the confrontation, but to map out the next steps in her journey. Every detail mattered: what had worked, what had surprised her, and where she had felt vulnerable. She wrote about her fear at the airport, the shock of Mark and Tanya's casual dismissal, and the moment of clarity when she decided to reclaim her life. Each sentence solidified her resolve, transforming past pain into actionable insight. She recognized patterns she had previously ignored, subtle manipulations, emotional games, and attempts to undermine her confidence, and committed to addressing them systematically. Next, Blake created a long-term plan for her independence and personal growth. She researched financial advisors, legal protections, and supportive networks that could provide guidance and safeguard her autonomy. She considered travel, professional opportunities, and personal projects that had been postponed or dismissed due to familial expectations. Each potential action was weighed not only for practical benefit, but for its contribution to her emotional and psychological well-being. For the first time in years, Blake felt the thrill of possibility, a sense that life could be shaped on her own terms rather than dictated by the whims of others. Throughout the evening, Blake also reflected on the emotional dimension of her journey. She recognized that empowerment was as much about internal healing as external action. The anger, disappointment, and betrayal she had experienced were not weaknesses. They were catalysts for growth. She allowed herself to grieve, acknowledging the hurt caused by those she had loved most. Tears fell freely, not as a sign of defeat, but as a release, a cleansing of old attachments that no longer served her. In this emotional vulnerability, Blake found strength, realizing that true resilience is born from the willingness to confront and process pain, rather than bury it. Blake also began to reconstruct her sense of identity beyond the family dynamics that had dominated her life. She revisited hobbies, passions, and aspirations she had long neglected. Writing, painting, and volunteering became not just activities, but affirmations of her autonomy. Each small act of self-expression reinforced her sense of purpose and agency, reminding her that she was more than the sum of her familial roles. She envisioned a life rich with experiences, relationships, and accomplishments chosen deliberately rather than imposed upon by the expectations or manipulations of others. By late night, Blake reached out to supportive friends and mentors, sharing her journey and the steps she had taken to reclaim her life. Their responses were encouraging, filled with validation and constructive advice. Conversations with them reinforced a critical realization. She did not have to navigate this path alone. Supportive networks were crucial, and reaching out for guidance or collaboration was a sign of wisdom, not weakness. The sense of community she cultivated provided both emotional resilience and practical insight, further solidifying her confidence in her ability to sustain independence. Finally, as she prepared for sleep, Blake meditated on the symbolic transition she had undergone. The airport abandonment, the confrontation with Mark and Tanya, the legal preparations, and the emotional processing all formed a continuum of transformation. The journey ahead would undoubtedly include new challenges, but Blake knew that she was no longer the passive participant she had once been. She was a deliberate agent of her own life, equipped with the tools, knowledge, and emotional resilience to face whatever came next. As sleep enveloped her, Blake envisioned the days to come. Continued personal growth, strategic actions to secure her independence, and the cultivation of a life defined not by betrayal or disappointment, but by her own deliberate choices. She embraced the uncertainty of the future, knowing that with her newfound clarity and empowerment, she could navigate any challenge with precision and strength. Tonight, Blake Monroe rested not in resignation, but in the quiet, powerful satisfaction of a woman who had reclaimed her agency and resolved to live on her own terms, fully and unapologetically. The next morning, Blake awoke with a renewed sense of purpose. The confrontation with Mark and Tanya had set the tone for a new chapter in her life, but she understood that empowerment required not only awareness and preparation, but constant vigilance and strategic thinking. She reviewed the legal documents again, meticulously checking every clause, every signature, and every deadline. Blake had learned through a bitter experience that small oversights could be exploited, and she refused to give anyone, even her own family, any leverage over her future. Her meticulousness was not obsession, it was a safeguard for the independence she had fought so hard to reclaim. Blake spent hours creating a structured daily plan, blending practical necessities with personal development. Her mornings were dedicated to research and strategy, financial planning, legal updates, and identifying ways to protect her assets while exploring investment opportunities. She examined real estate, considered safe retirement plans, and even looked into opening a small consultancy using the skills she had honed over decades. By mid-morning, she would shift focus to physical and mental well-being, long walks through the city's quieter streets, journaling exercises, meditation, and carefully curated reading. She understood that physical health, mental clarity, and emotional resilience were intertwined, each reinforcing the other, forming a foundation of strength that no betrayal could undermine. By noon, Blake began tackling the emotional fallout of the past few weeks. She revisited memories with Jake, remembering his advice, humor, and unwavering support. She allowed herself to cry over the absence, but also to smile at the recollections of shared victories and quiet moments. Blake understood that honoring her past did not require dwelling on loss. It meant integrating those memories into a broader understanding of her life and values. Each reflection strengthened her resolve to avoid repeating past mistakes and to ensure that her remaining years were defined by intentional action and self-respect. Unexpectedly, a challenge arrived in the form of an anonymous call. A voice, hesitant but insistent, claimed to have information regarding Mark and Tanya's intentions, hinting at financial maneuvering Blake had not anticipated. Initially startled, she reminded herself to approach this new information with caution. Her instincts, honed by recent experiences, advised skepticism and strategic patience. Rather than reacting impulsively, Blake drafted a plan to verify the claims, reaching out to trusted professionals in law and finance to assess credibility. Every step she took reinforced her agency, demonstrating that empowerment was not passive but active and deliberate. By mid-afternoon, Blake's focus shifted to broader personal projects. She revisited hobbies long forgotten, picking up her writing with a renewed vigor. This was no longer a simple pastime. It became a method of self-expression and influence, a tool for processing emotions, exploring ideas, and even sharing her story with others who had faced betrayal and neglect. She composed detailed outlines for potential books, articles, and essays, envisioning the way her experiences could resonate with readers, providing insight, guidance, and inspiration. Writing became a vehicle for both healing and asserting presence in a world that had for so long tried to sideline her voice. Social reconnection also became a priority. Blake intentionally sought out friends and colleagues who had proven trustworthy over decades. Conversations were deep, honest, and invigorating, a contrast to the manipulative interactions she had endured with her family. She discovered that rebuilding trust in others required discernment, but also a willingness to remain open to genuine connection. Each interaction reinforced her belief in humanity's capacity for support, compassion, and shared purpose, a perspective she had risked losing under the weight of betrayal and disappointment. By evening, Blake reflected on the balance she had achieved between strategic foresight and emotional healing. Every decision, from reviewing contracts to taking a mindful walk, contributed to a tapestry of autonomy, resilience, and self-determination. She allowed herself a moment of pride, acknowledging the incredible transformation that had begun with a single, painful betrayal but had grown into a life she actively designed. As night fell, Blake sat by her window overlooking the quiet city streets, reflecting on the unexpected challenges she had faced and those still ahead. Her mind, once consumed by fear and doubt, now operated with clarity, foresight, and confidence. She knew obstacles would arise, unexpected financial complications, potential family resistance, or even the emotional toll of revisiting painful memories, but she was prepared. Blake had learned that challenges, though intimidating, were opportunities to exercise agency, demonstrate resilience, and reinforce boundaries. By the end of the day, Blake Monroe had transformed yet again. She was no longer simply a mother and widow navigating betrayal. She was a strategist, a thinker, and a resilient woman whose life had been reshaped by conscious choice. She had embraced uncertainty as a tool for growth, leveraged past pain into actionable strength, and fortified her life against further manipulation. Her journey was far from complete, but Blake had established a foundation upon which she could build enduring autonomy, confidence, and fulfillment. The following days marked a period of intense activity for Blake Monroe, a deliberate immersion into the practicalities of securing her independence while simultaneously nurturing her emotional resilience. Each morning began with meticulous planning. She reviewed her financial portfolio, consulted with lawyers about estate matters, and evaluated options for investments that could offer both security and flexibility. Blake had learned from past experiences that reliance on others, especially those who had proven duplicitous, was a vulnerability she could no longer afford. She approached every decision with measured scrutiny, taking notes, cross-referencing advice from multiple experts, and maintaining detailed records of every conversation, email, and document. This disciplined approach was new to her, a skill born of necessity, and she embraced it with the intensity of someone reclaiming control over a life that had long been dictated by the whims of others. Despite the focus on practical matters, Blake understood that personal development was equally crucial. Afternoons were dedicated to intellectual and creative pursuits. She wrote daily, transforming her thoughts, reflections, and experiences into structured narratives. His writings were more than cathartic. They became a blueprint for the person she was evolving into, a woman capable of insight, empathy, and strategic thinking. Painting, another long-abandoned passion, provided an outlet for emotions that words alone could not capture. Brush strokes on canvas reflected her turmoil, her hope, and the determination to transform suffering into beauty. Physical activity also became a cornerstone of her routine, not merely for health but for the empowerment inherent in maintaining bodily strength and stamina. She found that the disciplined rhythm of walking through quiet city streets combined with occasional yoga sessions grounded her, reinforcing a sense of control in a world that had once felt chaotic and threatening. Yet Blake's transformation did not go unnoticed. Subtle maneuvers from Mark and Tanya began to emerge, attempts at influence disguised as concern or casual updates. Tanya sent meticulously crafted messages, posing as gestures of reconciliation or helpful suggestions. Mark called occasionally, his tone alternating between placation and defensiveness. At first, Blake felt the familiar sting of doubt, the old reflex to second-guess her interpretations. However, she had trained herself to recognize manipulation, to examine motives critically, and to maintain firm boundaries. Every message, every phone call was scrutinized not for superficial content, but for underlying intent. She documented each interaction, noting inconsistencies, patterns, and potential risks. This vigilance was exhausting at times, but Blake understood that protecting her autonomy required both awareness and readiness. In the evenings, she immersed herself in research for potential projects that could provide both fulfillment and financial independence. One idea emerged, a consultancy leveraging her decades of professional experience, offering guidance and training in organizational management. She drafted proposals, outlined services, and identified target clients. By the beginning of the following week, Blake Monroe's focus had shifted from immediate survival and personal development to strategic intervention, particularly regarding the hidden maneuvers of Mark and Tanya. She had learned that their seemingly innocent updates and occasional offers of assistance were often veiled attempts at influence, testing her reactions and gauging her limits. Armed with meticulous documentation, legal counsel, and a growing understanding of financial structures, Blake decided to confront these challenges head-on. She created a detailed timeline of events, correspondence, and financial transactions, correlating them with her lawyer's advice and creating actionable plans for each potential contingency. This preparation provided her with a sense of empowerment that was almost intoxicating. For the first time, she felt she had the tools, knowledge, and foresight to counteract manipulation effectively. Blake's legal approach was systematic and precise. She reviewed every contract, inheritance clause, and communication that pertained to her late husband's estate. With her lawyer, she identified areas where Mark and Tanya could attempt unauthorized changes or assert claims that lacked legal validity. Each meeting with her lawyer reinforced her confidence, as she realized the strength of her position and the extent to which careful planning could preempt exploitation. They discussed potential negotiation strategies, ways to leverage third-party witnesses, and steps to ensure that all her legal rights remained protected. By understanding the mechanisms of influence and control that her family might deploy, Blake transformed what had once felt like vulnerability into a platform for agency. Financial independence became another cornerstone of her strategy. Blake explored options to diversify her assets, ensuring that her resources were not concentrated in areas susceptible to interference. She researched investment vehicles, secured accounts with multiple institutions, and consulted financial advisors to establish a portfolio that balanced risk and security. Each decision was documented, analyzed, and reviewed, reinforcing the principle that transparency and preparation were vital components of empowerment. By the end of the week, Blake had created a financial framework that allowed her to act decisively, pursue opportunities, and protect her interests without reliance on those who had previously betrayed her. Simultaneously, Blake focused on personal empowerment through visibility and influence. She shared portions of her story with close friends and professional networks, carefully controlling the narrative while asserting her voice. This step was both therapeutic and strategic. It allowed her to process emotions while demonstrating that she was not powerless or isolated. The response from her network was overwhelmingly supportive, offering advice, resources, and encouragement that further reinforced Blake's resilience. She began to see herself not merely as a victim of betrayal, but as a catalyst for action, capable of influencing outcomes in her life and in the lives of others facing similar circumstances. Evenings were reserved for reflection and creative expression, activities that provided balance and clarity. Blake used journaling and artistic endeavors to process the emotional weight of her interactions with Mark and Tanya. She explored feelings of anger, disappointment, and sadness, but also cultivated gratitude, hope, and determination. By integrating emotional work with legal and financial strategies, she developed a holistic approach to empowerment, one that addressed mind, body, and spirit simultaneously. This integration became crucial as the stress of navigating family betrayal could have easily overwhelmed her if not channeled constructively. Unexpectedly, small victories began to manifest. Mark attempted to question her control over certain accounts, only to find that Blake's meticulous preparation and legal documentation left him with no room for dispute. Tanya's subtle attempts at emotional manipulation, whether through guilt-inducing messages or indirect pressure, were met with calm, firm, and strategic responses that neutralized their impact. But each success, however minor it might seem externally, represented a significant psychological and practical triumph for Blake, reinforcing her belief in her capabilities and the value of her careful planning. By midweek, Blake had also expanded her network of support. She reached out to professional associations, joined forums for widows and women navigating complex family dynamics, and connected with mentors who offered both strategic advice and emotional encouragement. These connections served a dual purpose. They provided insight into best practices for legal, financial, and personal empowerment, and they reminded her that she was part of a community that valued autonomy, strength, and resilience. The combination of external support and internal fortitude created an environment where Blake could thrive even in the face of ongoing challenges. As the week progressed, Blake reflected on the transformation she had undergone. The fear, confusion, and helplessness that had initially consumed her were now replaced by clarity, purpose, and confidence. She recognized that the journey from betrayal to empowerment required patience, discipline, and deliberate action. Each step, whether reviewing documents, pursuing creative projects, or asserting boundaries, contributed to a cumulative sense of strength that could not be easily undermined. Blake understood that the road ahead might still contain obstacles, but she now possessed both the tools and the mindset to navigate them with precision and resolve. By the end of the week, Blake Monroe had become a formidable presence in her own life. She had neutralized many of the subtle tactics employed by Mark and Tanya, reinforced her financial and legal autonomy, and cultivated both personal and professional networks that supported her growth. More importantly, she had internalized a powerful lesson. Empowerment is not granted. It is cultivated through knowledge, preparation, action, and resilience. Her story, once dominated by grief and betrayal, was now being written with intention, strategy, and self-determination. With the foundation of legal, financial, and emotional stability firmly in place, Blake Monroe began to redirect her energy toward the reconstruction and expansion of her personal vision, a deliberate process that encompassed both creative and professional ambitions. She recognized that survival and empowerment were only the initial stages. The next phase required proactive engagement with life, turning challenges into opportunities for growth, innovation, and self-expression. Blake mapped out long-term goals in exhaustive detail, creating visual boards, lists, and timelines to articulate her aspirations clearly. She envisioned a consultancy that would leverage decades of her experience in organizational management, a platform to mentor and empower others while simultaneously establishing financial independence. The consultancy, however, was not just a business. It represented a vehicle for purpose, influence, and affirmation of her professional identity beyond the confines of family obligations. In parallel, Blake nurtured her creative pursuits with unprecedented dedication. Painting and writing became not merely hobbies, but essential components of her self-definition and healing process. Each day, she allocated hours to sit before her canvas, allowing colors and textures to translate emotions that words often fail to capture. Her writing, in particular, evolved into a structured project, a memoir of resilience, betrayal, and empowerment that could serve both as therapy and as inspiration for others navigating complex familial and societal dynamics. She approached these creative endeavors with rigor, setting deadlines, evaluating progress, and revising drafts meticulously. The integration of discipline and passion transformed her artistic. At the 10th week into her transformation, Blake Monroe had reached a point where private empowerment needed to intersect with public assertion. While she had meticulously rebuilt her internal and external resources, the ongoing presence of Mark and Tanya in the broader family network continued to cast shadows over her autonomy. She realized that true resolution required not only personal strength, but also public affirmation of her rights, capabilities, and intentions. To this end, Blake decided to strategically confront lingering family conflicts in a measured, deliberate, and legally informed manner. She prepared extensively, compiling evidence, reviewing prior communications, and coordinating with her lawyer to ensure that every interaction was protected and that she could maintain control over both the narrative and the outcome. Her approach combined legal clarity with emotional intelligence. She recognized that confrontation need not equate to hostility. Instead, it could be an opportunity to establish boundaries, assert her rights, and demonstrate her independence while maintaining a level of professionalism and dignity. In preparation, Blake drafted statements, rehearsed responses to potential challenges, and analyzed the motivations behind each of Mark and Tanya's possible maneuvers. She visualized multiple scenarios, anticipating attempts to provoke emotional reactions, undermine authority, or manipulate perception, and developed strategies to neutralize each effectively. This preparation allowed her to enter interactions with a calm, composed presence that radiated confidence and strategic awareness. When the moment arrived, Blake's execution was precise. She addressed family gatherings, legal consultations, and communications with a clear, measured voice. Her articulation of boundaries and expectations left little room for ambiguity, and her reliance on documented evidence and professional counsel reinforced the legitimacy of her claims. Mark's attempts at dismissive comments and Tanya's veiled manipulations were met with unwavering composure, as Blake responded with facts, legal reference, and controlled emotional expression. Each successful interaction reinforced her credibility and reduced the capacity of her relatives to interfere without exposure or consequence. At the same time, Blake used public platforms to project her evolving identity and mission. Social media and professional networks became channels for her to share insights, progress, and the principles she had adopted in navigating betrayal and empowerment. Her posts were carefully crafted, inspirational without being boastful, strategic without being antagonistic. This visibility served dual purposes. It affirmed her presence and authority, and it connected her with wider audiences who could benefit from her experiences and insights. Blake understood that public perception, when managed thoughtfully, could amplify her influence and further secure her autonomy. Blake's professional initiatives also gained traction during this period. Her consultancy, once a conceptual blueprint, began receiving inquiries and collaborative opportunities. Clients were drawn not only to her expertise, but also to the narrative of resilience and strategic empowerment that underpinned her approach. Blake leveraged these opportunities to expand her influence, mentor emerging professionals, and establish a reputation built on competence, integrity, and experience. Each project, meeting, and collaboration reinforced her sense of purpose, providing tangible evidence that she could convert personal adversity into professional and societal value. Despite these outward successes, Blake remained attuned to the ongoing internal work necessary for sustained empowerment. She continued daily practices of reflection, journaling, and mindfulness to monitor her emotional state and ensure that external pressures did not compromise her internal stability. Physical health, creative engagement, and intellectual growth remained integral to her routine, providing a balanced approach to complex challenges. This holistic self-management allowed her to respond to conflict with clarity rather than reactivity, maintaining control over both personal and professional spheres simultaneously. Blake also recognized the importance of strategic alliances. She cultivated relationships with mediators, advisors, and community leaders who could offer perspective, intervention, or support when conflicts arose. By integrating these allies into her network, she created a buffer against potential disruptions, ensuring that no single challenge could destabilize her trajectory. This network further reinforced her autonomy, providing resources, credibility, and reinforcement that complemented her own skills and preparation. Throughout this period, Blake observed subtle shifts in Mark and Tanya's behavior. Their prior confidence and attempts at manipulation diminished as they recognized her capacity for strategic planning, legal preparedness, and assertive communication. The realization that she could not be easily undermined or emotionally baited altered the family dynamic, reducing their leverage and forcing them to negotiate on her terms. Blake's combination of preparation, assertiveness, and public visibility transformed what had been potential vulnerability into strategic advantage, reshaping the balance of power in her favor. In addition to managing family dynamics, Blake extended her focus to community engagement and mentorship. She began conducting workshops, participating in panel discussions, and publishing content aimed at empowering individuals facing similar familial or professional challenges. Through these initiatives, Blake not only solidified her role as a leader and mentor, but also transformed her personal journey into a blueprint for others. The act of teaching, guiding, and influencing reinforced her confidence, underscored her authority, and contributed to a sense of legacy beyond immediate familial concerns. As the weeks progressed, Blake's life increasingly reflected intentionality and purpose. Every decision, interaction, and project was guided by strategic consideration, emotional intelligence, and personal values. The integration of legal, financial, professional, and creative empowerment created a cohesive framework that allowed her to operate from strength, clarity, and autonomy. Mark and Tanya's influence continued to wane as they recognized that her empowerment was not a transient state, but a sustained, deliberate, and multifaceted reality. By the conclusion of this phase, Blake Monroe had achieved a remarkable convergence of personal sovereignty, professional growth, and social influence. She had transformed ongoing familial challenges into catalysts for empowerment, built networks of support and authority, and established platforms for creative and professional expression. Her journey was no longer defined by betrayal or vulnerability. It was defined by strategy, resilience, and the deliberate pursuit of fulfillment. Paragraph 10 marks a critical evolution in Blake's story. She had not only reclaimed her life and resources, but also asserted her influence publicly, solidifying her position in both personal and professional spheres. Her path forward was clear, strategic, and purposeful, laying the groundwork for the final stages of her transformation, in which she would fully integrate all aspects of empowerment, legacy, and enduring personal identity. Following the strategic confrontations and public affirmation of her autonomy, Blake Monroe entered a phase where consolidation and legacy building became the central focus of her life. She understood that empowerment was not merely about overcoming past adversity, but about integrating every facet of her experience into a coherent, sustainable, and purpose-driven existence. Blake devoted herself to aligning her personal, professional, and creative endeavors into a unified framework, ensuring that each decision reinforced her independence, authority, and long-term fulfillment. She approached every task with meticulous planning, from business strategies and mentorship programs to her artistic projects, treating each as a building block in the architecture of her renewed life. Her consultancy, now fully operational, was more than a professional venture. It had become a platform for mentorship, education, and empowerment. Blake meticulously designed programs that combined leadership training, strategic planning, and emotional intelligence, tailoring content to clients who sought not only financial or organizational guidance, but also personal empowerment. Her reputation as a thought leader grew steadily, attracting individuals and organizations who valued her strategic acumen, lived experience, and ethical approach. She leveraged case studies from her own journey, anonymized to protect privacy, to illustrate the intersection of resilience, planning, and action, transforming her personal narrative into a teaching tool that inspired and guided others. Simultaneously, Blake's creative endeavors flourished. Her painting reflected layers of emotional depth and transformation, moving beyond mere aesthetics into narrative storytelling. Each canvas told a chapter of her journey, capturing moments of betrayal, struggle, reflection, and triumph in visual form. These works were exhibited in local galleries and online platforms, receiving recognition not only for their artistic merit, but also for the authenticity and emotional resonance that underpinned them. Writing, too, had evolved from private journaling to structured projects, including a memoir and a series of articles exploring empowerment, resilience, and strategic life management. This dual engagement with visual and literary art reinforced her sense of self and allowed her to communicate her journey to diverse audiences, creating impact both personally and publicly. Blake also prioritized emotional and physical well-being with a rigor that matched her professional and creative pursuits. She maintained a disciplined routine that balanced exercise, meditation, and reflective practice with her demanding schedule. Yoga, swimming, and long walks became daily rituals, sustaining both her physical health and mental clarity. Journaling, mindfulness, and therapy sessions ensured that past trauma did not resurface in ways that could compromise her equilibrium or judgment. Blake understood that holistic empowerment required continuous attention to body, mind, and spirit, and she approached each dimension with intentionality, discipline, and care. Financial independence, a cornerstone of her transformation, had reached a stable and sustainable point. Investments, consultancy revenue, and strategic asset management created a secure foundation that allowed Blake to operate without constraint or dependency. She implemented systems for long-term financial planning, including retirement funds, diversified portfolios, and risk mitigation strategies, ensuring that her autonomy was reinforced by tangible security. This financial confidence allowed her to make decisions based on strategic vision rather than reactive necessity, further solidifying her empowerment and positioning her as a role model for responsible and proactive wealth management. Throughout this consolidation phase, Blake remained vigilant in managing residual family tensions. Mark and Tanya, recognizing the permanence of her empowerment and the futility of prior manipulations, gradually reduced interference. Blake maintained firm boundaries, utilizing legal frameworks and clear communication to ensure that any attempts at intrusion were swiftly neutralized. Occasional interactions were navigated with precision, combining diplomacy with assertiveness, reinforcing both her autonomy and her credibility. Over time, the family dynamic stabilized in a way that no longer threatened her trajectory, and Blake's position as an independent, respected, and self-determined figure became firmly established. Blake also deepened her engagement with the wider community, transforming personal empowerment into collective impact. She launched workshops, participated in public speaking engagements, and mentored aspiring professionals, focusing on leadership, resilience, and strategic life management. These initiatives allowed her to extend the lessons of her journey beyond personal experience, creating structures that could benefit others, navigating complex familial, professional, or societal challenges. The process of teaching and mentoring not only amplified her influence, but also reinforced her internal sense of purpose, turning her story of survival and empowerment into a broader narrative of societal contribution. Integration of her professional, creative, and community-focused efforts demanded meticulous time management and strategic prioritization. Blake approached each day with a structured plan, balancing client work, creative output, community initiatives, and personal reflection. She used digital tools, planners, and accountability systems to ensure that her time was aligned with long-term goals, minimizing distraction and maximizing productivity. The result was a life that appeared externally seamless while being internally structured and intentionally designed, reflecting the synergy between strategic planning, disciplined execution, and creative expression. In parallel, Blake nurtured personal relationships that were authentic, supportive, and reciprocal. Friendships, mentorships, and collaborations were carefully selected to reinforce positivity, growth, and mutual benefit. Toxic or manipulative connections were firmly excluded, creating a social environment that supported her autonomy, well-being, and professional trajectory. These relationships provided feedback, encouragement, and opportunities, reinforcing Blake's sense of community while preserving the integrity of her personal and professional vision. Blake's ability to integrate diverse elements of her life also allowed her to anticipate and respond to unforeseen challenges with resilience and agility. Business fluctuations, creative blocks, and sporadic family tensions were navigated with preemptive strategies and adaptive problem solving. By maintaining multiple layers of preparedness, emotional, financial, professional, and social, Blake ensured that her empowerment was durable, flexible, and resistant to disruption. This systemic approach transformed potential vulnerabilities into manageable variables, reinforcing the sustainability of her autonomy. At the culmination of paragraph 11, Blake Monroe had achieved a comprehensive consolidation of her life, combining autonomy, influence, creativity, and well-being into a cohesive, resilient, and purpose-driven existence. She had successfully neutralized ongoing family interference, expanded her professional and creative impact, and created structures that ensured long-term stability and growth. Every aspect of her life reflected intentional design, strategic foresight, and disciplined execution, underscoring a transformation that extended far beyond mere survival into the realm of sustained empowerment and legacy. Ultimately, this paragraph underscores the pivotal moment in Blake's journey where empowerment is no longer reactive, but fully integrated. She had transformed past adversity into a platform for influence, creativity, and strategic growth, establishing a life that was secure, autonomous, and impactful. Paragraph 11 sets the stage for the final phase of her story, in which she will solidify her legacy, celebrate her transformation, and articulate a vision for enduring personal and societal influence. As Blake Monroe approached the next stage of her journey, the focus naturally shifted from consolidation to celebration and recognition of her achievements. She understood that the culmination of her efforts, personal, professional, creative, and social, deserved acknowledgement, not only for validation, but also as a way to inspire others and solidify her legacy. Blake's celebrations were far from superficial. They were intentional, reflective, and aligned with the principles of empowerment she had cultivated over the past months. Each milestone, whether a professional success, artistic achievement, or personal breakthrough, was approached with conscious awareness, gratitude, and purpose, reinforcing the depth and sustainability of her transformation. Professionally, Blake had reached a level where her consultancy and mentorship programs were widely recognized. Invitations to speak at conferences, lead workshops, and participate in panels became frequent. Each appearance was meticulously prepared, combining insights from her lived experience with actionable strategies for leadership, resilience, and empowerment. Her ability to articulate complex lessons in a relatable and motivational manner positioned her as a respected thought leader. Feedback from clients, attendees, and peers reinforced her credibility and highlighted the tangible impact of her work on others, creating a network of influence that extended far beyond immediate professional circles. In the artistic sphere, Blake's creative output had matured into a recognized body of work. Exhibitions of her paintings drew attention not merely for aesthetic value, but for the storytelling embedded in each piece. Viewers were moved by the emotional depth, narrative resonance, and authenticity expressed on the canvas. Blake also began publishing essays and short works, some reflecting her personal journey, others exploring universal themes of betrayal, resilience, and empowerment. The combination of visual and literary art allowed her to communicate on multiple levels, engaging audiences emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. Each exhibition and publication reinforced her public identity as someone who had transformed adversity into meaningful, impactful expression. Parallel to professional and creative recognition, Blake cultivated opportunities for social acknowledgement that aligned with her principles. She organized community events, charity initiatives, and empowerment seminars, using her resources and visibility to support causes she cared about. These endeavors were not merely performative. They were grounded in strategic impact and genuine intent. Participants in her initiatives often cited Blake's authenticity, clarity, and dedication as motivating factors, demonstrating the ripple effect of her empowerment. Each act of social contribution reinforced her purpose and highlighted the possibility of converting personal triumph into collective benefit. Blake's personal life reflected similar growth and fulfillment. Relationships with trusted friends, collaborators, and mentors deepened, creating a support system that was both nurturing and empowering. These connections provided avenues for celebration, reflection, and shared joy, reinforcing the importance of surrounding oneself with individuals who honor and uplift personal values and achievements. Blake also dedicated time to personal rituals of gratitude, reflection, and self-recognition, reinforcing a sense of inner fulfillment that was independent of external validation. She journaled about milestones, meditated on her journey, and celebrated privately and publicly in ways that honored her progress and intentionality. Public recognition, though secondary to intrinsic fulfillment, became a natural consequence of Blake's sustained efforts. Articles, interviews, and profiles highlighted her transformative journey, her professional accomplishments, and her creative output. Social media amplified these recognitions, creating visibility that expanded her influence and connected her with broader audiences. Blake approached this attention with humility and strategic awareness, using it not to inflate ego, but to amplify impact. By curating her public presence intentionally, she ensured that recognition served as a tool for inspiration, mentorship, and empowerment rather than mere personal validation. A critical component of this celebratory phase was the acknowledgement of her own resilience and strategic intelligence. Blake reflected deeply on the challenges she had navigated: betrayal, familial manipulation, professional hurdles, and recognized the specific skills, practices, and insights that allowed her to transform adversity into opportunity. This self-recognition reinforced confidence, grounded decision-making, and strengthened her capacity to influence future outcomes. By celebrating her own capability, Blake solidified a psychological foundation that would support continued growth, creativity, and empowerment. Blake also used this period to formally document her journey. She created a structured archive of experiences, lessons learned, and practical strategies for overcoming obstacles. This archive served multiple purposes. It was a resource for her ongoing work, a repository of insights for mentees and collaborators, and a personal testament to her transformation. Through careful documentation, Blake transformed her life story into a tangible tool for learning, guidance, and legacy building, ensuring that her journey could benefit not only herself, but also future generations seeking empowerment and resilience. In addition to professional, creative, and personal recognition, Blake embraced opportunities for reflection and celebration of family dynamics that had once been sources of tension. Over time, Mark and Tanya adjusted their approach, and Blake's measured assertiveness and legal preparation had created a stable, respectful environment. While past conflicts remained part of the narrative, they no longer dominated interactions or dictated emotional energy. Periodic acknowledgments of shared milestones, when appropriate, allowed Blake to navigate family connections with dignity, ensuring that empowerment did not come at the cost of estrangement, but through strategic boundary setting and conscious relational management. Blake's approach to celebration and recognition extended to incremental wins as well. Every successful negotiation, project completion, and creative breakthrough was acknowledged as a marker of progress. By emphasizing the importance of both major and minor victories, she reinforced a mindset of continuous improvement, gratitude, and strategic awareness. These incremental recognitions were not trivial. They became building blocks for sustained motivation, confidence, and long-term fulfillment, ensuring that empowerment was experienced as an ongoing dynamic process rather than a static achievement. Financial independence, which had been a cornerstone of her journey, also became a platform for celebration. Blake used resources strategically to support both personal projects and philanthropic initiatives, demonstrating that economic empowerment could be leveraged for societal benefit. Her financial decisions reflected foresight, responsibility, and a desire to create meaningful impact, further solidifying her sense of autonomy and reinforcing her position as a credible and influential figure. As this phase unfolded, Blake experienced a profound alignment between internal fulfillment and external recognition. Professional success, creative output, community influence, personal growth, and family management coalesced into a harmonious framework, reflecting a life characterized by intentionality, resilience, and strategic empowerment. The act of celebration was not merely performative, but served as a reinforcement of identity, values, and ongoing commitment to personal and societal contribution. Ultimately, paragraph 12 emphasizes the synergy between achievement, recognition, and fulfillment. Blake Monroe's journey illustrates that true empowerment is multidimensional. It encompasses public acknowledgement, personal satisfaction, social impact, and strategic influence. By celebrating milestones, recognizing growth, and leveraging visibility for positive impact, Blake solidified her transformation while creating a platform for sustained influence, mentorship, and legacy building. Blake Monroe had reached the stage where every aspect of her life, personal, professional, creative, financial, and social, had been transformed into a cohesive, purpose-driven, and resilient structure. The journey that had begun with betrayal, manipulation, and profound uncertainty now culminated in a life defined by autonomy, mastery, and lasting impact. Unlike before, when external circumstances dictated her emotional state and opportunities, Blake now operated from a position of total agency, having built systems, relationships, and personal practices that ensured sustained empowerment. She understood that true transformation was not a moment but a continuous process, one that required vigilance, reflection, and deliberate action. Her past, once a source of pain and limitation, had become a blueprint for growth, teaching her how to navigate complexity, exercise judgment, and act with strategic intelligence. Professionally, Blake's influence had reached a level that allowed her to shape industries, mentor leaders, and contribute meaningfully to societal discourse on empowerment and resilience. Her consultancy continued to thrive, now recognized internationally for its unique integration of strategic insight, emotional intelligence, and ethical guidance. She designed programs that empowered clients to achieve not only financial or operational success, but also personal autonomy, illustrating the interplay between professional competence and inner resilience. Through speaking engagements, workshops, and online platforms, Blake shared her knowledge widely, emphasizing that empowerment was multidimensional, requiring attention to mindset, systems, relationships, and personal integrity. She remained a role model, not through self-promotion, but through tangible impact, demonstrating that leadership grounded in authenticity, discipline, and strategic foresight could inspire lasting transformation in others. Creatively, Blake's work had reached unprecedented depth and recognition. Her paintings, previously private expressions of emotion and healing, were now celebrated for their narrative richness, emotional authenticity, and technical mastery. Each canvas served as a chapter in the story of transformation, resonating with audiences on a universal level. Her literary projects, including memoirs, essays, and thought pieces, amplified the reach of her insights, bridging personal experience with collective learning. Blake's art became a tool for empowerment in itself, showing that storytelling, whether visual or written, could transform pain into purpose, vulnerability into strength, and personal history into universal lessons. Through her creative expression, she offered others a lens through which to view adversity not as limitation, but as an opportunity for growth, reflection, and agency. Financial independence, once a critical goal for survival and autonomy, now served as a platform for strategic impact. Blake's investments, business ventures, and philanthropic initiatives reflected careful planning, foresight, and alignment with her values. She demonstrated that wealth, when managed responsibly, could be leveraged to create opportunities for others while reinforcing personal stability. By integrating financial management with purpose-driven initiatives, Blake transformed resources into instruments of empowerment, modeling how economic agency could coexist with ethical and societal responsibility. Financial freedom no longer represented mere survival, but a tool to cultivate influence, support meaningful projects, and create legacy structures that could endure beyond her personal sphere. In her personal life, Blake cultivated relationships that were genuine, supportive, and aligned with her values. She surrounded herself with mentors, friends, collaborators, and loved ones who reinforced positivity, growth, and mutual respect. Toxic relationships were firmly excluded, while authentic connections were nurtured and celebrated. This social ecosystem functioned both as a support network and as a platform for collaboration and impact. Family dynamics, once a source of manipulation and tension, had stabilized into a respectful and manageable structure. Blake's measured assertiveness, legal foresight, and emotional intelligence ensured that boundaries were honored, enabling her to engage with family without compromising autonomy or well-being. She demonstrated that empowerment was not isolation, but the capacity to navigate relationships strategically, fostering both respect and meaningful connection. Holistically, Blake maintained a disciplined focus on physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being. Daily rituals of exercise, meditation, journaling, and reflection reinforced clarity, resilience, and mindfulness. Emotional regulation, nurtured through therapy and self-reflection, allowed her to approach challenges without being derailed by past trauma or reactive impulses. Blake's holistic approach created synergy across all domains of life. Physical vitality supported mental clarity, emotional balance enabled strategic decision-making, and spiritual alignment provided purpose and direction. This multidimensional discipline ensured that empowerment was sustainable, not fleeting, allowing her to act with both power and wisdom in every area of life. Blake's journey also embodied a profound commitment to legacy. Recognizing that personal empowerment is magnified when extended outward, she created structures to mentor, educate, and inspire future generations. Workshops, mentorship programs, public speaking, publications, and creative initiatives became channels for transmitting knowledge, insights, and resilience strategies. By documenting experiences, analyzing outcomes, and sharing lessons learned, Blake ensured that her journey could serve as a blueprint for others navigating adversity, complex relationships, or professional challenges. Her life became a living case study in how intentionality, strategy, and emotional intelligence could convert hardship into lasting impact. Recognition, both internal and external, now coexisted harmoniously in Blake's life. She experienced the fulfillment of achieving her goals while also inspiring admiration, respect, and emulation. Unlike the earlier phases of her journey, where validation was either withheld or manipulated, Blake's recognition was authentic, grounded in tangible achievements, and aligned with her values. Each acknowledgement, whether a public accolade, client testimonial, artistic critique, or personal milestone, reinforced her sense of agency and purpose without creating dependency on external approval. Blake had mastered the delicate balance between self-validation and external recognition, ensuring that empowerment remained internally grounded yet socially acknowledged. Strategically, Blake continued to anticipate challenges with foresight and agility. Her ability to navigate complexity, manage uncertainty, and respond to unforeseen events became a defining feature of her autonomy. By creating multiple layers of preparedness, emotional, financial, professional, and social, she mitigated risk and maintained control over outcomes. This strategic resilience not only safeguarded her accomplishments, but also enhanced her credibility and influence, demonstrating that empowerment is not static, but requires ongoing vigilance, reflection, and proactive action. Ultimately, the culmination of Blake Monroe's journey can be understood as a holistic embodiment of empowerment, mastery, and legacy building. She had transformed vulnerability into strength, adversity into opportunity, and personal growth into societal impact. Every domain of her life, career, creativity, relationships, finance, and personal well-being was integrated into a coherent, resilient, and purpose-driven system. Her story serves as a testament to the transformative potential of strategic action, disciplined self-development, and authentic leadership. Blake's life, now fully aligned, reflected the synthesis of past lessons, present accomplishments, and future vision. She had converted every obstacle into a stepping stone, every betrayal into insight, and every challenge into an opportunity for strategic empowerment. The person who once felt powerless and constrained had evolved into a figure of agency, wisdom, and influence. Her journey demonstrated that true empowerment is multidimensional, encompassing self-mastery, social impact, creativity, and resilience. As the final note of her story, Blake Monroe stood not only as a survivor, but as a luminary whose life exemplified the possibility of transformation through intentionality, courage, and strategic foresight. She had completed a full circle, from uncertainty and manipulation to autonomy and mastery, from isolation and betrayal to influence and legacy. Every chapter of her life had been consciously shaped, integrated, and elevated, leaving behind not only a record of personal triumph, but also a framework for others to emulate. The closing of her journey was not an endpoint, but the commencement of enduring influence, a life where empowerment, resilience, and legacy coexisted in perfect harmony, offering a roadmap for anyone seeking to convert adversity into lasting impact.